right, we are going to start again. Welcome. I hope there will still be some more people coming. Let me introduce to you Joyce NyairoNoneNone from Nairobi, Kenya. Pedro, and I'm going to fuck this up, Corwin yeah? From Luanda, Angola, and Florian Sievers from Berlin. They are from the 10 Cities project. The 10 Cities project is dealing with 10 cities, as the name says, on 2 continents, and are basically investigating the public sphere from the perspective of club cultures in all these different cities. It's going to be interesting. Welcome, the 3 of you. Big claps.
Hello. Hello. Welcome, everybody. We're going to do this in English. We have to, because we have international guests. And yes, as you've just heard, we are all parts of a project that has somehow a lot to do with the topic of this conference, Inside Out, because we're dealing with club culture, with going out, with the rituals of nightlife. And as you all know, whenever you go out, you will always be a bit curious about whether you get into the clubs or not, or what to wear to get in, or who's inside, who's already inside, who's waiting outside. So going out has a lot to do with the inside and the outside. We really believe that clubs provide a semi-privateness. It's not really public, it's not really private, and therefore they can be really interesting spaces for countercultures and alternative scenes. This is somehow a thought from the 90s, and we still believe in it. It's a 90s idea that that clubs can be some kind of utopia, or like not a utopia, but a real space where you can do things that you normally can't do. Like you all know if you're German, you all know this raving society term, maybe still. So this is basically really our topic. The 10 Cities project is a project by Goethe Institute Nairobi, together with many other Goethe Institutes in Europe and African countries. So we run this on, as you've just heard, in 10 cities on 2 continents. That'll be Nairobi, Johannesburg, Luanda, Lagos, and Cairo in Africa, and Berlin, Bristol, Lisbon, Kiev, and Naples in Europe. The project is divided into 2 parts. We have a music part, which is more the practical part, where Pedro is involved. We have an exchange programs of electronic music producers from Europe and Africa. They will meet, they produce music together, they exchange ideas. And then we have the theoretical part where Joyce and I are more engaged. We are editors together with Johannes, who is the director of Goethe Institute in Nairobi, editing a book together that will look at the use of urban spaces, the public sphere, and some other ideas from the perspective of club culture. That means how are clubs used, who goes there, and we have a time frame from the 60s to the present, which is interesting for us because in the 60s many African countries gained their independence, and in the 60s you will all know that in Europe there has been some sort of social revolutions, some turmoil, so that's the time frame we're looking at. And now we have on stage this interesting mixture of people because we are representing both parts of the project, and we are also representing both parts of the continents. So we have 2 times Africa here and 1 time Europe, and I will quickly introduce my fellows here. So this is Dr. Joyce NyairoNoneNone. As you've just heard, she's from Kenya. She was a consultant on Volkswagen Foundation, on a Volkswagen Foundation's research program, also a grant maker for the Ford Foundation, which is a very interesting, very important foundation in Kenya, and supported many independent media and arts organization in East Africa, and she also writes for newspapers and academic magazines. For example, in 2007, she co-edited a book called Urban Legends, Colonial Myths, East African Popular Culture and Literature. So, and Pedro Coquenão, as I think it's pronounced, is born in Wambo, Angola, grew up in the suburbs of Lisbon. He nicely put it, he there was listening to stories about living somewhere else. I found that a very nice phrase. He's a radio DJ now in Lisbon. He has founded a collective called Fazuma that is dedicated to promoting African-influenced music in his hometown or in his country, but also in Angola, I think, right? It's over. And he started to, under the name Batida, he started a radio program, and this now has evolved into a musical project with an album on Soundway Records. Maybe you know that. It's a very interesting label, and he often samples Angolan music from the 70s, like samba or kazakuta, which is a carnival rhythm, and combines it with modern electronic music, resulting in a form of, well, very special kuduro, which is just a modern Angolan dance music. And he's also 10 Cities curator for Lisbon, so he's working together. He was just in Nairobi, just as I was. Maybe you can still see it from my tan. It's not holiday, but we worked there together. So I'm a journalist for economics. I was one of the 3 editors of Groove magazine. Maybe you know that magazine for electronic music and club culture until last year. And now I work as a freelance writer, writing about music and economics alike. And I have a love for African cultures and African music because I really feel that all the music I like, from blues till techno, is really rooted basically in African cultures. So we are co-editing this book together. So what we want to talk about today is, we thought about maybe half an hour of talk, then half an hour of questions. If you have so many questions, we want to raise some questions. We all were currently, just a short while ago, we were in Nairobi, and Pedro was producing music there, meeting with Kenyan musicians. Joyce and I, together with many other authors from African and European countries, sat together for 1 week and just really, I don't know, we really cracked our heads about thinking about African and European music cultures and things like that. We really believe that music builds spaces. We would all call them clubs on streets or in buildings. And wherever they are, wherever people dance, wherever they go out, not only at night, but also in the daytime. Joyce, maybe you can talk about that a bit, because we found out during our discussions that one very important thing, for example, a very important space that you would never think of as a club space. When you say club in Europe, you would always think of a space like this with a DJ and some loudspeakers. But we found that public transport is a very important club space. Would you want to talk about this a bit? Because where you come from, matatus are a very interesting form of club.
Thank you. It's an interesting thing about public transport, because it's not just the music that plays inside. It's the way the vehicle itself looks. It's a way it's set up as a stage. It's a way it's set up as a dance space, as a space of expression. And so sometimes, whether you're in Lagos, whether you're in Johannesburg, where they call them taxis, or you're in Dar es Salaam, where they call them daladala, or in Nairobi, where we call them matatus, what you will find is the way in which the space, both outside and inside the vehicle, is colored with lyrics or names of artists. Beautiful, beautiful graffiti. But also just a legend, a statement about which artist they think is doing the most interesting thing at the moment, or which particular song has a catchy rhythm, or sometimes just a catchy phrase, and a phrase that travels not just within the car, but travels within the society in terms of the way people use it, and use it interestingly. It's also interesting to see how young people, especially, relate to that space of moving music. You find young kids going to college, and by young I mean anything between 15 and 25, and they're standing at the bus stop, but they're waiting not just for the next vehicle that's taking them to where they're going, but a particular brand. So it could be Tupac, it could be Octopizzo, it could be Muthoni the drummer, but they know the vehicle. Even if they're involved in an accident and they go to court and they're making this statement, they actually know the vehicle, not by the registration number, but by the name, the legend, the lyric that was there that particular week. And that's an interesting thing, because it's a colorful space, it's a space of all sorts of transactions. And the other thing that happens, even in Luanda, I think, if you're sitting there, you can also buy the music. You're sitting in a vehicle and you're waiting for it to go to a particular destination, and there's a vendor who comes around. In Nairobi, there'll always be pirate CDs. They're never originals, but people buy them anyway, and that's part of how the music circulates.
Actually, regarding Luanda, and I can speak a bit of both, Angola and Portugal, in Luanda, the candongueiro, which is the name for the taxi cab, is used mostly, it used to be more than nowadays, but it was used as the first step for a musician to showcase his work. So it was quite a regular thing for me to end up a production of a track, and then to try to fit my track inside the candongueiro at some point, or within a compilation, or I would do a compilation myself and started offering CDs to the candongueiros. So with the regular airplay on the candongueiros, my track would get popular, because radio Still is a bit, but used to be quite closed. Actually, I don't know how things are here in Berlin, but mostly radio tend to be a bit mainstream and tend to be more focused on artists that have a label or some sort of more of a formal career. And in Angola, it has nothing to do with that. So musicians usually produce tracks, and then they try to put them in these compilations called Batida. Actually, that's where I got the name from. It's something like a do-it-yourself compilation where you can put your favorites, and then you put just your own track on, opening or closing the compilation if you are more modest, and try to push it to be more popular. Again, going back to the Mutatos, I just remember this one very nice episode at night in Luanda, so you can see the relation between the importance and the interference of the taxi cab in the city. The mood changes a bit in Luanda from daytime to nighttime, as I think almost everywhere. But the taxis keep on playing loud music, and I was involved in a situation where two guys wanted money for this parking car, and the man gave just one note, and so both guys were struggling for the note, and there was it was kind of violent. Things were getting rough, but at some point this candongueiro just passes by, and then they started to dance immediately, and the fight just stopped. So this is how important the candongueiro is. It stops violence and it involves people inside and outside where it passes by.
Did you ever try, or would you try to give your own music to the candongueiros? I mean, would they? I have to explain that the candongueiros, and when we say taxi here, we would normally think of a sedan, like a small car. But we're talking about the minibuses here, like small VW buses. In Luanda, it was mostly be Toyota Hiace. And would that work on these sound systems, your music, or is that too far away from the original?
Actually, for you to have the proper image, is actually most of the times is a Toyota Hiace. I don't know if you know it, but it's probably the most popular car in Africa because it keeps on going and going and going, and all the spare parts are quite easy to fix. So sometimes you are walking on this taxi cab and people are fixing the car at the same time. So this is quite the reason of being so popular in Africa. But regarding music, in Luanda, what I find, like in South Africa, you have more bass and things are more like very luxurious, I guess. In Nairobi, average, but average good. In Angola, most of the times the sound systems within the taxi cabs are not so good. So you don't have a proper bass or proper highs. It's kind of a medium sound. So most of the times the kuduro that you get to listen that comes from Angola, it has this very rough sound because it's made to work on that specific space, not in clubs, but on that specific space. So it's dance music made to work mainly on taxi cabs, which is kind of curious, I guess. I tried, of course. It's like every producer's dream to have his track pumping on a taxi cab. Actually, even with DVDs and movies, you try to almost to give it to the driver so he keep on promoting it. The first documentary I did, the first edition of the documentary, it was a pirate release, actually saying pirate all over. So people would know that it was an official and legal pirate thing, so the candongueiro could sell it properly. And most of the times you ask for the candongueiro, the driver, the taxi driver, what are the tracks that are working more now? What is the most requested song inside the taxi cab at the moment? So it's quite a nice and real way to get to know more about music instead of just tuning in the radio. This in Luanda, and I think not so much in South Africa, because South Africa has lots of TV and radio dedicated to dance music. Nairobi, more or less. But yeah, so the taxi cab is quite a strong and important space.
Yeah, I think what's also interesting about that taxi cab as a space is the way in which, in a city like Nairobi, the associations for Matatu were always lower middle class, working class. But it's interesting to see how those practices have influenced Nairobi society at higher levels. So you'll find young kids who want to party on Saturday and they hire a public transport vehicle so that when they arrive at the club, they arrive in that way with the music blaring, with the legends, with the lights, and they do really interesting lights inside the vehicle and they put them on at night and it's just a moving club. You can literally see it that way. But not just because the kids hire a private vehicle like that, but also because even kids who drive, who have their own cars or they borrowed a car from their father, the first thing they will do is make sure that they don't arrive at the club alone. You have to go up picking up your friends and you have to pump up the volume and you have to arrive with people sitting on the window and just looking like they are already at the club. So it's been interesting to see how that has, the matatu culture has influenced the rest of society. And when you look at people arriving at Electric Avenue in Nairobi, you hear the club in the car before you get into the formal club space. Or as used to happen a few years ago, it's not happening anymore. Sometimes they would just park at a petrol station and everybody's seated in their car, listening to music, having a drink before anybody gets into the club. Or sometimes they'll do it as they leave the club early morning. So those are interesting ways in which the space becomes fluid and influences practices from one social class to another.
When you said Electric Avenue, maybe you should explain. It's the area in Nairobi where many clubs are situated. I don't know which part of the city. What the part of the city?
It's in Westlands. It's in Westlands, and it's been interesting how that has happened over time. It wasn't designed that way. It's just the way the music moved to a particular area, which is not to say that it's the only place where music is happening, but it's one place of concentration, and so it's become unique in that sense.
Do you want to say?
Yeah, I would say that regarding Lisbon, the taxi cab is not such a strong influence on club music, but what you have nowadays is quite a mobile thing. I don't know how it is over here, but people really play loud music from mobile phones onto public transportation, and that is something that makes part of the soundtrack nowadays. Also, to have a proper car with a fantastic PA system and almost to be able to do your own party before you go to the club, or if you don't get to get inside the club, you just do it outside. It's also a very strong thing, especially in the suburbs of Lisbon, especially related to Kuduro music also, mostly bass music, but quite Kuduro, Afro house, which is kind of a, people call it Afrobeat in the suburbs of Lisbon, but it's not fella related. It's like Afro music with beat. It's like straight, it's like a kind of a down-tempo kuduro or maybe an up-tempo house with more syncopated beats. And those sounds plus the kizomba, which is kind of a more slow-down version and to be danced with another person, those are the sounds and the beats that you get to listen from these cars and mobile phones. You don't listen to them on the radio, but you see them on the charts, and they are the most downloaded tracks in Portugal. But it's kind of a suburbia thing. But it's real, it's strong, and it's a very key thing. If you go there, you don't miss it. Only if you keep yourself within the touristic circle. But if you go to the suburbs, that's what you'll hear.
So you see that one of the things that we found out during this project which started in November with a production phase in Luanda, Angola, where I've been, and Lagos, Nigeria, and now we've been to Johannesburg in South Africa and to Nairobi in Kenya, and there's still, I think in 1 week we're going to Cairo, Egypt. And one of the things that we really found out through the musicians and the practice as well as the theory is that clubbing and going out is not only fun, it also tells a lot about society, the way people dance, the way they dress, the way the clubs are, where they are situated, who owns the clubs actually. I mean, economic aspects are really important here as well. So we've seen that, and also of course about the cities themselves, like the urban structures, which is one of our main topics here. So you can see that, for example, in Nairobi, you would come to Electric Avenue. That's where you ended now when you talked about it. I would find it interesting. Can you tell us a bit about how do you get into the clubs? I mean, the proper clubs, not the bars. What do you have to do to get in, and what must you not do if you don't want to be refused at the door? It's quite different from Berlin.
Yeah, and what happens in Electric Avenue? Some clubs will have a cover charge. Sometimes they'll have an offer, like you buy a particular drink and you can come in. It's interesting to see the way the dress code is different from one place to another. There are clubs that are still very formal, like Gypsies, but there are others that are fairly easy, like Changes, like Q Stick. And what they want you to do is just have the look, which means that you're looking casual, you're looking young, you're looking in the mood, you're already dancing while you're at the door, and that just tells them that you're part of the group. The cover charge is not usually very, it's not set very high, because the idea is that once you're in the club, you're going to spend a lot of money on drinks. And that keeps the attraction, that keeps people moving. Perhaps the other thing to say about one of the reasons why the cover charge at the clubs in Nairobi is not very high is because the way Nairobians club is like sampling music. You don't go to one club for a night, which is the exciting thing about Electric Avenue. You have a choice of clubs. So you'll probably go to 5 clubs in one night. And if you're going to be paying anything like 10 euros in one particular place, then it's going to be too expensive by the end of the night. So they tend to keep the cover charge low because they know that that's the culture of the place. And it's about keeping the circulation going rather than holding on to a particular small special group.
I also found it interesting that I think one of you said that once in some African clubs, as long as you are dressed properly, you get inside.
Yes,
and
that's
so
Lagos.
It doesn't matter. It's Lagos.
It's Lagos. It's very
Lagos,
exciting.
Nigeria. So it's very exciting because then it doesn't matter where you're from socially. What is your economic
Lisbon
background?
also.
Lisbon also. Okay, and that is similar in Berlin somehow. But I really shocked my friends from Africa when I told them that in Berlin somehow you must not be dressed up to get inside. Actually, nobody could understand that. Like there, everybody really gets dressed up to the max to get inside. Whereas when you show up at the door of Berghain, I guess you know that the stories, then well, you will be refused entrance from sometimes. Because here, I mean, it's the same idea of equality inside the club, but on a lower level. So everybody's really dressed down more of in the Berlin clubs that I like, so that you have a feeling of equality there as well. And it's not so much about showing off like in African clubs, right?
Yeah, in African clubs, like when we had the conversation about Lagos, it's very, very showy. It's about how you look, and it's partly because the club activity is tied to something else. Like very often it will be tied to, interestingly, a funeral party. And they have this idea of shutting down the street. So because there's a funeral in a particular home, they take over that street and everybody is welcome. But you have to come looking the part. And it's all very dressy, it's very showy, it's African dress, it's a cultural statement. And that's what gives you the entrance into the venue. And then the interesting thing also is how the dance gets differentiated according to age. In Lagos, if you go to a club as a man who is 45 and you're in the company of somebody who is 30, so if the 30-year-old is on the dance floor dancing, the 45-year-old man does not dance. He just stands there nodding in appreciation of the music. And then if somebody who's younger than you is dancing particularly well, you have a tradition that they now call owambo, or showering, where you just keep giving money to the person who is dancing the best or who is impressive. And it's a way of making a statement about your age, making a statement about your social standing, but also respecting the space of the young people while still being a part of it. So you participate, but you participate differently. You're not shut out. You're allowed to come in with a different set of rules. And that's an interesting thing to observe.
And when I told Lisbon, I was referring also to African clubs, not regular Lisbon, European kind of thing. Yeah. More the African, from African descendants or African from Angola, Mozambique, Cape Verde, you have to really dress sharp. Sneakers, I don't know, only if it's like a very special release by Air Jordan or something, but you have to be really properly dressed.
Still talk about dress. You went to Electric Avenue. Did you find there was a gender differentiation in the dress? I always feel like the men are very lazy about how they look when they go out.
Yeah. Of course, I mean, women dress up better in African countries from as far as I have seen. It's quite a difference. But I mean, I guess it's a bit similar in European countries as well, and in many European countries. Of course, it depends on the location and the occasion, like where you go and why you go. Of course, but I mean, I think that the tendency is generally quite the same. I find it quite interesting because you talked about dancing. When I was in Reservoirs in a club in Nairobi, I danced. I like to dance. It was hip hop, so I danced. I danced with many locals, but very soon people came to me and said, like, you can't dance like that to this song because you have to do the bicycle, or you have to do the car driver, or you have to do the whatever, you know. So there's one particular dance associated to each song, even though if it's a US American song by Snoop Dogg or whoever that might be, they make up their own dances to these songs according to the video clips sometimes I don't know, to the lyrics, and that is, I mean, something that all of us in Europe, we don't know. It's funny because then you know how to move, but you have to know the moves to actually dance to this song. It's really funny, isn't it?
And it's interesting responses also about, the thing about understanding Nairobi dance culture is to see how acquisitive it is, how it borrows from so many different traditions. And as you say, you know, there'll be a dance video move from the song in the video, and they've picked that up, but then they've mixed it up with a very local statement. And it's interesting to key into how that moves from one club to another as well. You know, is it that somebody sent out a memo? Did somebody send out a message on Facebook? How does everybody know this dance? It's just interesting to see that movement. But also, as we were saying of Lagos, you'll find that in the lyrics, the artists, the local artists will keep shouting in the club. But the concept of a club in Lagos is not the same thing as it is in New York. So it's interesting how they've borrowed that, because mostly in Lagos you'll find street parties, you'll find very informal venues happening at clubs, and that's what they call the club. So when they shout in the lyrics in the club, it's not clear exactly what they mean, but it's possible also that they're relating to a different audience, relating to a different society, and trying to make those connections through the music.
Or maybe they just mean 50 Cent in the club. It's just, yeah.
One thing that I think it's quite associated with dance in Africa, like music and dance are the same thing. It's very difficult. Even myself, when I put my music on stage, since day one, I had to have always a dancer with me, not to have the situation of having a show where no one would be dancing. So at least on stage, the thing would have to be represented properly. If it was in Africa, everyone would come together, but sometimes in Europe, people just stare and look. And music and dance, for me, they have always been almost the same thing. And especially if you think about African music and most of the traditional forms, the way that people come together, even if they are not musicians, if you go to the, I don't know, last century or something, people, actually Joyce, when we got here, she was like, maybe you should just sit down like this and start a conversation, which is something that you have to do, like probably more in an African way. You have to be more involved, interactive, not like this, and just talking like this, facing you and you facing me. So it has to be more like this, opening to you and making a circle, and maybe at some point someone would dance. And the people that dance doesn't have to be a dancer, the person that's playing the drum doesn't have to be a musician. So I think that relation has always been there. And in Angolan music, for example, Kuduro, every track, every new track has a choreography associated. It's a specific one, a very specific one. The dance of the finger, the dance of something else, the dance of the frog. Every new music has to have a dance. So if I'm an MC, I'm going to write something, but I have to wonder, and I have to have someone dancing, or I have to wonder how the track is going to be danced. So, like the club thing of going to a place to dance, it's always there since day one on each music. Even if the music is made early morning or on a weekday, music is always made to dance and to involve and to celebrate more than necessarily just to be a background thing.
In fact, it's an interesting thing because I remember the presentation, when we had the presentation from Cairo, and Maha said that Egyptians can dance to anything. And that was an interesting statement about how prevalent.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, from as far as I have seen it and understood it, African cultures are much more about, you know, like the social being together, the togetherness, compared to especially Berlin, going out in Berlin. You know, when we had a public discussion in Nairobi, and I was kind of criticized that in Europe people would mostly go out for themselves in the club and just dance for themselves. And I found that quite interesting because it's for me it's a total different concept, but it's also a matter of togetherness, because you dissolve your ego somehow in the crowd. When you're in a good club, you forget that you are one, so you're one with the crowd. Whereas in for example, in Nairobi, I guess people would rather watch each other and just like watch a specific person, not do the couple dance, but you have your group of friends with you, you relate to somebody. Whereas I could get totally lost on a dance floor in Berlin. So that, I mean, to sum it up a bit, because we're almost over with the first half an hour, it shows that clubbing can tell a lot about societies and countries. And as we didn't even talk about sexuality. Gay clubs in Africa is a very interesting topic, because being gay there is a very complicated thing in most of the countries. So I mean, it shows a lot, and it has. So you can see that that nightlife might have some political content, that you might read some meaning out of it. I found it quite interesting. I mean, Pedro, you have produced a lot of music with musicians from Kenya, as well as, of course, from Angola, and we've talked about these topics a lot. What do you think, you guys? we have this project. It's a book, and it might be a book. It should be a book. It should be a CD once, and some 12 inches. What will be the impact of the project? I mean, what might it maybe change in your countries or in your societies, or is there going to be some change? Does it have any effect? For example, in African countries, most of the times the history of club music has not been written down, because African countries are so much, or societies are so much about oral culture, just like keep talking about things. Nobody ever writes something down. So what do you think?
Yeah, and I think the other thing, you're absolutely right about that, how oral we are as a society, but it's also the traditions of scholarship, where spaces like clubs are not taken seriously as a subject for academic matter. But I think what's really important for me about this project is the way in which it contributes to the archive of Kenyan music. Because it's an archive that is absent, it's an archive that you can't find in one place, it's an archive that you have to struggle to conceptualize, even music that was made just 10 years ago. And this is the one interesting thing, that one important thing that this project provides, is a space where you can read an essay that talks about dance music from 1960 to the present time in Nairobi. That's quite a precious gift. But I think the other thing that it's going to begin to do is, when you look at the essay on club cultures, I'm hoping, is to demystify this idea that participation is only important at a political level, where it is guided by laws, by lobbying, by electoral processes. And that has been very much the way in which public participation has been conceived. I think that one of the things that this essay should do, and that the whole volume of the book should do, is to get us to think of public participation in a totally different way, and to see it happening in different sites, to see it happening in different forms of expression that are very largely focused on the body itself.
I was just looking to the pictures, trying to see who was behind us, and I think the most I could try to make a balance of what has just happened, because I just ended the Nairobi episode 3 days or 4 days ago, so it's quite too early. But there's for me the most important thing on this kind of projects is actually bringing people together, and the connections you get to make. And I really got to make real friends. I don't know if I don't know how deep they will be, but they are friends now. Not one, not two, not three. Quite a few friends. To a point, actually, I keep trading emails. I was just trading emails to Eli right before the meeting. I've been trading emails with the drummer queen. And lots of people that were mentioned, actually Octopizzo, I got all the emails. Octopizzo is like this kind of Jay-Z from Nairobi, with all the philosophical and conspiration kind of things behind. So I think I really got to make some friends, and of course they will I rely on you to contextualize it all and put it in a very beautiful way. But for myself, it was actually about making friends and building bridges between different countries and different cultures, and in the end finding ourselves in very common grounds. And that for me was the most important thing, the friends that I bring, and the songs and the tracks that came out of those 15 days, a bit more than that.
So when we conceptualized this whole project with the Goethe Institute in Nairobi in Kenya, we were talking about productive feedbacks, because we're kind of feeding back money of the electronic dance musics from Europe to African countries. It's not, I won't say their roots, but they are somehow related, and often you find common ground there. And what I found most interesting is to, of course, to prepare our perspective that you all may know from a European perspective with the African perspectives, and see how many similarities there are, but of course differences. I mean, you would expect both, but whenever you find them, it's always still surprising. Like the people in African countries dance to the same music that we did here in the 70s. You are talking about the Bee Gees, Staying Alive. I mean, everybody who was young in the 70s knows that here, and or Donna Summer or Diana Ross or these guys. But often, of course, if you've heard from this talk, there are many differences as well. And I find it really refreshing to talk to people from African countries about the differences as well, because it's really, I mean, there are things that you would have to talk about, and well, that makes it an interesting project for me. And
yes, stage-wise, because we did end it with a big show downtown Nairobi. The good thing that I really took from it was actually that's sometimes people tend to patronize the audience and say maybe people are not that into alternative music, maybe people are not that into experimental music or whatever it is. But what I really felt, it was quite the opposite. I think that the market in Nairobi is a bit conservative, radios and so, but the audience that was there, and it was quite packed, the place, they were really into listening to new stuff and to see new stuff, and the output of the whole night, it was like having the most popular act at the beginning of the night, and I was afraid that people would just run off after the Camp Mula give their show, but they didn't. They just stayed there and they were quite interested. So again, the dance floor and the club and the purpose of dancing, sometimes it really takes away more the differences than other sorts of environments, because people are in a different mood. They are into let's come together, let's dance together, let's enjoy ourselves, not as in other forms or other kind of places that you can find yourself. And that's what I found. At the end of the night, we were dancing Kwaito with this South African DJ, and it was quite fun. That kind of bringing people together. That's actually what I take the most out of this project. And about the club thing and the dance music thing, actually is about bringing people together, and that's how. And the ego thing actually is one thing that you mentioned. I remember I'm a kind of a guy that prefers to be DJ instead of dancing, though I dance when no one is watching. And I remember when the only time I went to New York, I went to this club Sunday afternoon with all these guys, Francois Kevorkian, Danny Krivit, yeah, Body and Soul. And I remember no alcohol, no drugs involved, and I was just listening to it. Fantastic sound system, fantastic musical selection, and at some point I was with my hands in the air, and I just don't know how did I get there. But that feeling of just, it has probably is related to something more spiritual, with something tribal, with I don't know. But that feeling of not being yourself and just being with the crowd, it's really fantastic. And that I kind of happened in that night and a bit during the studio production wise.
So okay, I mean that would be from our side for the first part here. I mean, maybe you have some questions, any questions about our clubbing experiences in African countries, our music experiences, our discussions. Whoever has some questions, please feel free now.
Maybe this question is a little bit basic. Is there a difference between the audience in the clubs? Is there kind of social division between the people going out? For example, is there a different culture of dance, of workers' people, or of people from the countryside, or people from the urban regions who are more wealthy?
Okay, yeah, that's a really interesting question. There's one particular club in Nairobi called the Carnival, and what they started doing in the early 1980s was to differentiate the nights at the same club, so that if you went on Sunday night, it was soul night, and it was old school R&B. If you went on Thursday night, it was Bhangra night, and it played a particular kind of Indian music made in the UK. And that created a class as well as social and racial differentiation within the same space, depending on what night you went there. Now, with time, what developed, again, coming out of the carnival, was what we now refer to, for want of a better term, ethnic nights. And the idea with ethnic nights is that you pick a particular community. Take, for example, the Luo community. And you have, for the Luos, you'll call it Ramogi night. You name it after a great warrior in their community. And so on that particular Friday night or Saturday night, you're going to play the music from the Luo community. You'll serve the cuisine from the Luo community, as well as the alcoholic drinks. And what that tends to do is invite even a lower class of people from the Luo community in Nairobi into the carnival. And so what you find on that particular night is that there is no class differentiation, but there would be ethnic differentiation. But with time, what started to happen is that, of course it's a city, people get curious about the practices of other communities, and they'll have friends across ethnic communities, and so you will invite them to a night like that. And what's always interesting for me to see is how the repertoire of the music is chosen, so that you represent 30 or 20 or 40 of the quintessential songs from that community, and it will be from the traditional music in the 30s or 20s up to the present day. So I would say that that's how the differentiation has happened, because that concept that was started by the carnival has spread to so many other clubs. And that is a way in which you'll find differentiation happening within the club space.
Is that the club space where they're playing the country music?
Yes, so like if it's the Kikuyu community, for example,
Kikuyu, okay.
The Kikuyu community is associated with a love for Western country.
It's very, very bizarre when I heard that. I mean, maybe we have to just drop one sentence about the of course, we don't know that here in Europe, but there are these there are really tribal differences in African countries where here you have a family, and maybe you feel yourself as a Bavarian or as somebody from Lower Saxonia or something like that, and that feeling is much stronger, of course, in African countries where it's an ethical thing. And then you have these Kikuyu people, and from it's not clear where from, but it's a steady part of their parties, of their going out, or of their clubs is a country face. So they're playing this US American country music. It's really interesting. I found that.
I would just add that in Lisbon, city I came from, actually you have like the regular clubs like you have in Berlin, but the African clubs where everyone that comes out of Africa or as an Africa connection goes to, people still dance together. And that's quite a difference. People dance in pairs, so it's quite usual, and it makes part of the night, people inviting others to dance along, instead of just people dancing individually, as you see in most of the countries in Europe. And that's a difference. With the clothing code, the differences just go away, because everyone is so properly dressed that you cannot tell who is the person with lots of money or no money at all.
So any more questions from your side? Actually, my friend Pedro, he is DJing here tonight together with a dancer, right? Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, at 10 o'clock at Refill Bar, which sounds nice for a bar. I will be playing 2 hours of music coming out of Lisbon and Angola mostly, maybe some from Nairobi or South Africa, but mostly Lisbon and Angola. Starting at 10, 2 hours, if you can deal with it.
Aren't any more questions, or are there any more questions? Because I might also say something for the last 15 minutes that we found out also during our discussions, how important dance music is or has been for many African countries to find their own identity after independence. Because you might know that many African countries became independent in the 60s from their former colonial countries, and they were left there, and then they had to build a state from nothing. So maybe you want to talk about that a bit. You remember we had somebody from Egypt there, Maha. She's a journalist, and she told us a very interesting story about this music that is called Shabi. And Shabi started in the 60s with being music of poor people from the countryside, and it became, through a very long and wound-up journey, the music of the revolution of the Tahrir Plaza. And we found this phenomenon in some other African countries as well, right? Was it the same in Kenya? I'm not so sure now.
Yeah, well, the process of looking for a sound that becomes a national sound may not have happened consciously, because artists work in the way that they work, depending on what they respond to. But it's been interesting to see how in Kenya, the quintessential sound is benga. Now, if you don't know what the benga sound is, you need to listen to the song Shakira recorded for the World Cup, Waka Waka. And she worked with a South African group called Freshly Ground. And what Freshly Ground did is that they had just had a big visit to Nairobi, a really successful visit to Nairobi, a couple of concerts. And they jammed together with some local musicians, and they picked up the benga sound from there. And so when they were selected to work with Shakira, they thought, this is a uniquely African sound that we can add to this World Cup that is happening in Africa. And that was a big moment for benga. I would say one of the biggest international moments for benga. But benga became very well known in Southern Africa. In West Africa, in 1972, there was a Kenyan musician who recorded a song called Lunchtime. And I've been surprised whenever I travel to Ghana and to Lagos, people will ask me whether Lunchtime, the artist, what was his name again? Is he still singing? And that, I find that absolutely fascinating. And maybe the way in which that song traveled across to West Africa was through Festac, which was a big Africa cultural festival that happened in 1977. But so there have been a few big moments for Benga, but nationally, I think it's been quite a revolution in its own way. The Benga sound comes from the Lake Victoria region, from the Luo community. And again, in countries that, as Florian rightly said, where there's ethnic differentiation that sometimes can get violent at a political level, it's been interesting to see how Benga has been a unifying sound, so that the artists coming from the lakeside, coming to record their music in Nairobi, and then getting hired as session guitarists by artists from other parts of the country, from the coast, from the central province, from the highlands, and that's how the sound has traveled. Because they shared session guitarists on River Road as they were recording in Nairobi, that sound became adopted by different communities. And in as much as in the early 90s, we picked up hip-hop in a big way. We have turned it into our own kind of peculiar sound as kapuka music. You probably heard people talk of genge. But I think really the quintessential Kenyan sound is Benga. And it's become a form of national rather than simply ethnic identity.
So it's I think also a very interesting story with Kuduro, because it started from what I've learned. It started in as a music in the Musekish, which is the ghettos of Luanda, and in some variations it has also become or it has been used by the state party as a soundtrack for a hip and young and cool African country. Because the son of the president sent some Kuduro dancers and musicians abroad, and so it used that as a vehicle for the image of Angola. Am I right, or is that wrong?
Yeah, later on, yeah. Kuduro has always been a marginal genre. It started off as actually an attempt of someone doing samba, which is the equivalent to bang in Angola, but with a keyboard, and trying to do dance music, but more in an European way. And the first track that gave the name to the genre is called Kuduro. Actually, it has a very silly story. The name was based on a Van Damme movie. Seriously, the guy was just making these funny moves with his S, and the genre is called hard S. That's the meaning of Kuduro in English. And that's how it came. The guy was making this very simple melody with an electronic marimba, kind of 130 BPMs something. And Van Damme was on the TV, and so he decided to honor Van Damme. And that's how Kuduro happened. But this was like lots of years ago. It was early used as an escapism kind of music, not with content, not with any strong references, just something to run out of the war times, this before the 2000s. And then after a while, people from hip-hop moved into the Kuduro and started giving Kuduro lyrics because it was just beat. And nowadays you have this genre more complex that involves dances, production, DJ production, and then also lyrics. You have two different kind of lyrics. The lyrics that's completely like a silly or just street lyrics, and then you have more conscious lyrics. And what the government did after his son acknowledged that his master's the president, that is like a 33 years old ruling president in Angola, probably one of the long-lasting leaders in Angola. And I'm talking about him because he has a strong influence in local culture, of course, because he's not important at all apart from that. And Kuduro was ignored for a long time. The first time I was back in Angola after war, it was 2002. You would go to clubs, and Kuduro was not played inside the clubs, only outside the clubs. So it was regarded as a very dirty genre. Actually, Musek, that you were talking about, Musek is the name that you give to all the space in Luanda that's outside the, how do you say, the Alcatrão, like all the cities have, the cars are on top of it, the road.
So where you don't have proper roads.
When the road
sand,
ends,
right?
and it starts the sand, that's where the Musek is. So it's not necessarily a bad place to be. Actually, the idea that I have from Luanda is that the people that live on the condos and on the big buildings, they are in the ghetto, because the majority of the people are living freely, and they are living imprisoned on their own ghettos. So it's a bit of the opposite concept.
To understand that, just a quick, because it's a matter of security. If you're very rich in Angola, you tend to live in a closed gated community just to protect yourself against crime. And so it's funny to if the people outside are saying you're living in the ghettos, not us.
No,
right?
it's the opposite. It's the opposite. And Kuduro was always a genre of the outside and not of the inside. Recently, I think over the last 3 years, they are trying to push Kuduro as an international brand. I don't know how's it going to happen, but samba, which is probably the quintessential also from Angola, has been since the early 60s, and you have names like Valdemar Bastos or Bonga that are people that are here for forever. So I don't know. Kuduro, of course, is a very interesting genre, more associated to club culture, but if you go back to the 70s, the club culture in Angola used to be about yards and making like weekend parties that would last the whole weekend with people dancing and eating, and this was the proper club culture in Luanda. I guess probably it was the same around in Kenya, I don't know, but in Angola it was really about the yards, just cooking and bringing people together and dancing. I don't know if I reply, probably I just mix everything, but okay, Musek is the part with the sand. Ghetto is the part where the rich people live. Kuduro is a very groundbreaking new genre that is being taken on about the president's son, because it's being used as a propaganda tool. And samba is the equivalent of benga music from Kenya.
I mean, some people might know Kuduro in Europe as well, because it was some kind of hip about 4 or 5 years ago, just for a very short time, especially when was the first Buraca Som Sistema, which is a group from Portugal with some Angolan people in there, and they made it quite famous here, but it quite quickly disappeared again, because I have to say that, I mean, I really love the music, but I guess for many European ears it's a bit too strange or too rude, because the beats are really like I don't know, it's like, I guess it's too harsh for many.
Yeah, I'll try to put it on a 30 seconds note. Luanda was a city built for 600,000 people in the 70s, and because of war it increased to 6 million. So it's a complete chaos. People coming from all different sorts of regions with different backgrounds. They have no experience on living in the city. So Kuduro is a kind of the output of that schizophrenic kind of meeting of people. So you don't have a TV channel, you don't have radio channels to normalize things. So the style has been not over the recent years, but on the early days, quite anarchic. And I think that was the main quality of it. Anarchic in terms of production, in terms of dance, in terms of expression. It was not a tribal thing, a specific tribal or ethnic thing. It was just the clash of everyone at the same time on the same city without knowing exactly what they should do, what were the codes, and that kind of clash was the cause of this very strange and original form of music and dance, I guess.
Yes. What about Kwaito? Did South African Kwaito have any impact here?
Not really. I mean, to be honest, I would say that 95% of Kwaito for our European ears is quite boring. It's really just like this, you know, it's the beats. I mean, Kuduro has very interesting beats. The breaks, it has some traditional drumming in there. It has, for us, this unusual Portuguese language. But to be honest, a lot of Kwaito is just like, I don't know, just very slow house that has these like barking dogs lyrics, you know, the rappers can't rap properly, they're not flowing, just like whoo, 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 and then you've got these beats. So it didn't really have an impact here. It's like it was interesting as a phenomenon, especially as a liberation phenomenon in South Africa after Mandela became president in '94, I think there was. So that there it had its importance, but as a music, like style-wise, I'm not so sure.
And it's been interesting to see also how the social function of Kwaito has changed. Because when it came on the back of bubblegum pop, like Brenda Fassie, which was very much songs of the revolution, quite entered that spirit of the revolution, but now it's become a statement about a return to rural identity. Yeah. So you have artists like Mafikizolo, you know, posing in the Basutu blankets and making that kind of statement about a return in the music videos. You see this whole return to the rural.
We have to explain that quickly. It's the equivalent that you have here in Europe when you buy newspapers or magazines about country life, the rural life, like the happy people in the countryside, and it's a bit similar to that. So you return to the original tribal background with the original tribal designs. You show yourself in the video clips on the countryside and just like show how happy people there are. I mean, the people from South Africa, they explained it. It's a mixture of a kind of a anti-urban backlash, but it's also looking for sales because more people still live in the countryside in South Africa than in the cities, right? So, yeah.
It's very much a commercial decision. I mean, it's and I've seen the same sort of commercial decisions come into the music in Nairobi, where gospel, you know, since the 1980s, mid-1980s, gospel has been the runaway hit genre. And you'll find a lot of artists who are having problems breaking through the hip-hop scene, the local hip-hop scene, will suddenly make a big announcement that they have become gospel artists. When you listen to the song, there's nothing, sometimes even in the lyrics, well, certainly at a sonic level, there's nothing in the sound to distinguish it from any other sound that is a non-secular sound. But what you find in gospel now is lyrics that camouflage. You can interpret them either way. The message could be about God, it could be about a hidden lover, it could be, so they allow themselves to do that, but at the same time, they market themselves as gospel because they know that's where the big sales and the big concerts are.
By Kwaito is fantastic. Just because Kwaito for me, I got to know it through a radio called Metro FM, and it was about the DJs playing house records, like more soulful and R&B oriented house records slowly. They would pitch down the masters at work early records, I don't know, maybe to less 4% on the Technics SL12 something. And it would sound, for me, it would sound perfect because it gives more space. Actually, in terms of production, there are a few elements. I don't know if you know the 909 machine, but like there's this open hi-hat that usually you use on dance music that's used like this. But in Kwaito, that sound is used like so you really get to enjoy that thing. It's like a kind of a house that white people can dance to. Properly, I don't know, or probably the thing is that if it is too slow, if a person doesn't know how to dance, it will show up. Probably that's your problem.
You can't hide with hectic movements there. You really have to be in the groove.
That's your problem. Because if it is too fast, if you are offbeat, people don't get to notice. But Kwaito is really sensual, but at the same time, it's really powerful and strong because the early songs I remember were about struggle and about marching against apartheid, of course. And it has this strength. The beat has this strength always there. It's a very kind of I'm marching. I'll keep on marching. But also this very sexy, if you want to. Also, so it serves both ways. You can be politician and sexy at the same time, which for me it works very, very, very well.
So I would say that is a very nice last word. I mean, to be a politician and sexy at the same time, and the beat is always there. So if there aren't any more questions. Are there any more questions? Yes, there's one. The documentation, when will it be out? So we just started writing the book because we had this workshop in Nairobi until last Thursday, and where we put the conceptual framework together, gathered all the authors from all the African and European countries, and worked on that book for 1 week. Now people start to write, so we're heading for maybe in 1.5 years, I guess. So it still takes some time. You know, we have to find a publisher. It will be in English. We want to publish it with a renowned scientific publishing company in English language. We haven't found that yet, so might still take some time. So you shouldn't take this as advertising for a book because it's still some time. It's same with the album. I mean, the last recording phase in Cairo is next week, starting next week, and then we have all the tracks together, and then we will look for a proper label to publish this, proper electronic music label, and we will see. Okay, then thanks a lot.
Thank you.